Welcome to Securing America with me, Frank Gaffney, the program that's a kind of owner's manual for protecting the country we love against all enemies, foreign and domestic, to God's glory and that of his kingdom. A man who has devoted much of his professional life to protecting this country against the greatest enemy we've ever faced, namely the Chinese Communist Party, is our first guest. His name is Dr. Anders Corr. He is principal with Corr's Analytics. He is also the author of two important books, Great Powers, Grand Strategies, The New Game in the South China Sea, and most recently, The Concentration of Power, Institutionalization, Hierarchy, and Hegemony. All topics we're going to try to touch on in the course of this conversation with him. Anders, it's great to have you. Welcome back to Securing America. I want to start by asking you about a piece that you wrote for the Epoch Times recently that sort of sets up a conversation I think we urgently need to have about what the Chinese are doing as a result of access to our capital markets. You talked specifically about insider trading in China that cost US investors, most of whom are unwittingly having their money placed in Chinese corporations by, well, people like Larry Fink at BlackRock and other financial mavens. But they've lost a lot of money to this insider trading, among other gambits. Talk, if you would, a little bit about that.
Well, it's a danger that is prevalent in, basically what you have in China is a state controlled capital markets, companies, private equity companies that are looking to gain maximum profit by any means necessary. And they don't have the same rules that we do in the United States. They don't have the same, the US authorities don't have the same reach to China to combat insider trading or the fudging of accounting. We just don't have the same rules and enforcement overseas that we do in the United States.
If I could just say, the other piece of this is that they don't have to conform to our laws and regulations either, which is further exacerbating this problem. Which brings me to something that I was anxious to talk with you about in light of all of that, namely the prospect that something called the Federal Retirement Thrift Investment Board, an oversight and sort of management structure for the largest pension fund in the world, that namely supporting the pension planning of US government employees, past and present, military as well as civilian, is now talking about putting the investment dollars of such pensioners into China as well. Is that advisable in light of the kinds of problems that you just described?
I personally am not investing in China. I think it's too opaque. I would never invest in a mutual fund that invests in China. And that's exactly as you point out, and as Brian points out in your excellent work, your excellent letter press release on that. As you point out, these things are bundled into mutual funds. And we saw during the 2008 financial crisis how the bundling of bad assets, mortgage backed bad assets, really made it difficult for investors to understand what they were investing in. It was totally opaque in the same way that the current investments in China are totally opaque to American investors and the SEC. I don't personally, for myself, consider them safe investments.
Mhm. If that were just the extent of it, it would be one thing. I mean, people take risks all the time and they can make ill advised investments due to insider trading or even investing in fraudulent companies. It's a problem, don't get me wrong, but it's not as big a problem as the idea that what the cumulative effect of these investments represents, it seems to me at least, is an infusion of capital into the Chinese Communist Party itself. And one of the things that I admire so much about your work, Anders, is you've had a strategic view of what the Chinese are doing that I think most of us are not quite clued up about. And maybe starting with the South China Sea and what they've done there to gain not only considerable access to, but actual control of the waters, the airspace, the underseas resources of one of the most strategic pieces of real estate, if I can call that, water included, on the planet. What are they doing in the South China Sea? And if we are enabling it, if we are financing it, for heaven's sakes, at least in part, what are the consequences for American security and, for that matter, commercial interests?
Well, the $2.3 trillion that U.S. investors, institutional investors, have flowed into China investments, including state pension funds, including our biggest private equity companies. Some of that, as you say, is flowing into companies that actually do the dredging in the South China Sea to make the artificial islands on which air bases, Chinese air bases, are built, naval yards, places to dock submarines, places to dock Chinese aircraft carriers. And this is being done in the territory of the Philippines, Vietnam, Malaysia, Brunei, Indonesia. All of these territories are claimed by China. And it's a real indicator that China's intentions are not honorable by any stretch of the imagination. Even if you are a communist and you see what China's doing, and they're stealing territory from a poor country, Vietnam, which is also communist, you can see that they have no principles at all other than the expansion of the Chinese Communist Party's power. That's their sole goal and sole principle. It has nothing to do with the so called ideology that they espouse.
Well, the ideology of global dominance, for the Communist Party, I guess, has something to do with it. But I think your point is really well taken, Anders. And I've used the layman phrase: "What's mine is mine, and what's yours is not just negotiable, but it's susceptible to seizure." And unfortunately, as you know so well, what they've been doing in the South China Sea, seizing essentially the real estate, developing it. And by the way, I think it's fair to say that some of these naval facilities, as you've described them, are roughly the size of Pearl Harbor, one of our major naval installations in Hawaii, of course. But this is something that they are doing in literally every other choke point around the world and a lot of other strategic places besides, as part of this Belt and Road Initiative, are they not?
Yeah, absolutely. They're trying to build this out to Gwadar in Pakistan, Sri Lanka, Hambantota port. They've got their base in Djibouti. They're trying to, they bought a port in Greece. So they're really trying to push their ability to deploy, uh, forward basing pretty far out there all the way to Europe. They're trying to protect their supply lines, basically, including trade and also including trade in oil and gas. So
And it
this
gives
is
them
this
an
is their
opportunity
Achilles heel.
to interfere with other people's supply lines. Needless to say, and
Absolutely
I
right.
would add to the list Iran, Panama, of course, the Caribbean. Some say even the Azores are in their target
The
sites.
west side of Africa.
Yeah, west side of Africa as well.
Yeah.
Anders, we have to take a short break. We're going to come right back and we're going to talk a bit more about what the Chinese are up to in the data business, another opportunity for global domination that they seem intent on seizing. That and more straight ahead.